Hi, I'm John Belushi. Just having a cup of coffee before the show. It's kind of a tradition with me.
He made millions laugh. The Samurai, Bluto, Jake Blues. For a brief, brilliant moment, he was everywhere. Then, on March 5th, 1982, at just 33 years old, he was gone, found dead in a hotel bungalow on the Sunset Strip. The news shocked the world. This is what really happened to John Belushi, the kid from Chicago. John Adam Belushi was born on January 24, 1949 in Chicago, Illinois. His parents, Adam Anastos Belushi and Agnes Dimitri Belushi, were Albanian immigrants who had come to America seeking a better life. His father owned the Fair Oaks restaurant on North Avenue in Chicago, where John would sometimes help out as a kid. His mother worked in a pharmacy. They were hardworking people who instilled a strong work ethic in their children. John grew up in the Humboldt Park neighborhood before the family moved to Wheaton, a western suburb of Chicago, when he was 6 years old. Wheaton was a more comfortable, middle-class environment where John could grow up relatively safely. He was the oldest of 4 children, with younger brothers Billy and Jim, and a sister named Marion. Jim would eventually follow his brother into comedy and acting, becoming a cast member of Saturday Night Live himself years later in the 1980s. The Belushi family was close-knit, and John's success was something they all shared in. John attended Wheaton Central High School, where he met Judith Jacqueline, who would become his wife. He was energetic, funny, always performing, always seeking attention. His teachers recognized his talent for drama and encouraged him to pursue it. In 1965, while still in high school, John formed a band called the Ravens with 4 friends. They recorded 1 single, but it went nowhere, and the band broke up. Music would remain a passion for him throughout his life, eventually leading to the Blues Brothers. After high school, John enrolled at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. He wasn't particularly interested in academics. What he was interested in was comedy and making people laugh wherever he performed. While at DuPage, he helped found an improvisational comedy troupe called the West Compass Trio, along with Tino Insana and Steve Bishekas. The name was a nod to the Compass Players, the famous improvisational group that had been active in Chicago in the 1950s. The West Compass Trio started performing around Chicago, and they were good. Really good. But they had a problem. They were performing material borrowed from the Second City, Chicago's legendary comedy theater. When Joyce Sloan and Bernie Solins from Second City found out, they went to investigate. Instead of suing the young comedians, they hired John Belushi, Second City, and the road to New York. In February 1971, at just 22 years old, John Belushi joined the Second City main stage cast. He was the youngest member in the group's history. It was at Second City that everything began to fall into place. John met Dan Aykroyd, Brian Doyle Murray, and Harold Ramis. These friendships would shape the rest of his career. John performed 6 nights a week at Second City, perfecting his physical, gonzo style of comedy. He could steal a scene without saying a word. He played characters ranging from the mayor of Chicago to Hamlet. His range was extraordinary. But what really set him apart was his fearlessness. He would throw himself into any character, any situation, without hesitation. His impression of Joe Cocker, complete with the singer's distinctive body movements and facial expressions, became legendary. John didn't just mimic the voice. He captured the entire essence of Cocker's stage presence, the way his body contorted and jerked to the music. People who saw the impression never forgot it. It was the kind of performance that made audiences realize they were watching someone truly special. When a former cast member asked John how he could be so relaxed on stage, he replied simply, "Because that is the only place I know what I am doing." That statement revealed something important about John. He was most comfortable, most himself when he was performing. Off stage, life was complicated and uncertain. On stage, he knew exactly who he was and what he was supposed to do. After 14 months with Second City, John and Judith moved to New York City in the spring of 1972. John had been cast in National Lampoon's Lemmings, an off-Broadway rock musical revue. It was originally booked for 6 weeks. It ran for nearly 10 months. The show's cast included Chevy Chase, Christopher Guest, and Harold Ramis. John was building connections that would last a lifetime. In 1973, John was hired as a writer for the National Lampoon Radio Hour, which later became the National Lampoon Show in 1975. He was working constantly, performing, writing, honing his craft. He married Judith on December 31st, 1976. Through all the chaos that would come, she remained by his side.
I'll defend anything that I have done.
Saturday Night Live. On February 11th, 1975, NBC gave producer Lorne Michaels a call. They needed a show to fill the late-night Saturday slot. Michaels agreed, but only if the show was broadcast live. NBC agreed, and Michaels began assembling a cast. Chevy Chase and Michael O'Donoghue recommended John Belushi for the show. Michaels was reluctant. He thought John was too much of a renegade, too opinionated. During his only interview with Lorne, John announced that he hated television and was only talking to him because he heard this show would be different. Lorne was not impressed, but something changed Michaels' mind. On October 11th, 1975, 15 minutes before the start of the first show, John Belushi finally signed his contract with NBC. He was the only cast member to appear in the first ever scene, titled Wolverines, alongside writer Michael O'Donoghue. At first, John was unhappy with his minimal airtime, but that changed quickly. Over the next 4 years, John Belushi became arguably the most popular member of Saturday Night Live. He created character after character. The samurai, who appeared in various sketches wielding a katana and speaking gibberish. Pete Dionysiopoulos, the Greek owner of the Olympia Cafe. Captain James T. Kirk, Ludwig van Beethoven, and his furious editorial commentator on Weekend Update, who would escalate from calm to screaming, finishing with his catchphrase, "But no!" John's physical comedy was unmatched. He threw himself into every character completely. He did impressions of Henry Kissinger, Elizabeth Taylor, and most memorably, Joe Cocker, performing alongside Cocker himself in 1976 to sing together. And then there were the Blues Brothers. The Blues Brothers. It started as a warm-up act. John and Dan Aykroyd would perform before Saturday Night Live tapings to get the studio audience energized. John wore aviator sunglasses and chewed gum. Dan wore a pork pie hat. They performed rhythm and blues covers. The audience loved them. On January 17th, 1976, they appeared on the show as the Blues Bees, dressed in bee costumes with sunglasses, singing a blues number. The concept kept evolving. By April 22nd, 1978, they appeared on Saturday Night Live as Jake and Elwood Blues, two bluesmen on a mission from God. Paul Shaffer introduced them with a fictional backstory about playing clubs on Chicago's South Side. The Blues Brothers became more than a sketch. John and Dan assembled an incredible backup band. Paul Shaffer on keyboards, Donald Duck Dunn on bass, Steve Cropper on guitar. They recorded a live album at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles, while opening for comedian Steve Martin. The album, Briefcase Full of Blues, was released in 1978. It went to #1 on the charts. By 1978, John Belushi had a #1 TV show, a #1 movie, and a #1 album. He was 29 years old and on top of the world. The movie that made John Belushi a film star was National Lampoon's Animal House, directed by John Landis and written by Harold Ramis, Douglas Kenney, and Chris Miller. The film told the story of the Delta Tau Chi fraternity at fictional Faber College in 1962. The Deltas were misfits, troublemakers, and underdogs fighting against the pompous Dean Wormer and the privileged Omega fraternity. Of the younger lead actors, only John, at 28, was an established star when filming began, but he hadn't appeared in a film before. His fame came entirely from Saturday Night Live. This was his chance to prove he could carry a movie, and he did it by playing the most outrageous character in the film. John played John Bluto Blutarski, the wildest Delta of them all. Bluto was gross, crude, barely verbal, and absolutely unforgettable. He wore a toga. He climbed ladders to spy on women. He gave rousing speeches about how the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor. He started food fights. He was pure ID, pure chaos, pure comedy. Some of his moments in the film were improvised. The cafeteria scene where he piled food on his tray and stuffed it in his mouth was completely unscripted. Director John Landis simply told the camera operator to stay with him and let him go. When he squeezed his cheeks and created a zit out of mashed potatoes, the horrified reactions from the other actors were genuine. They had no idea what he was about to do. Animal House premiered on July 28, 1978. It became the highest-grossing comedy of its time, making over $141 million at the box office. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars and later placed it on his top 10 films of 1978. He wrote that John controlled a wicked array of conspiratorial expressions with the audience, and could invest minor slapstick opportunities with a streak of genius. The film is now considered one of the greatest comedies ever made and has been preserved in the National Film Registry. John's performance as Bluto defined him in the public imagination. When he was interviewed by the Chicago Tribune in August 1981, he admitted, "I hate to admit it, but it's true. I am Bluto." That identification would follow him for the rest of his career, for better and worse. John and Dan left Saturday Night Live in 1979. They had conquered television. Now, they wanted to conquer film, and they wanted to do it as the Blues Brothers.
What would you order for your last meal? Cottage cheese and pineapple plate.
The Blues Brothers movie. The Blues Brothers movie was an ambitious, absurd, spectacular production. Directed by John Landis, it featured John and Dan on a mission from God to save the Chicago orphanage where they grew up. To do this, they had to reunite their old band and raise money. The film featured incredible musical performances from legends like Ray Charles, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, and Cab Calloway. Each of these sequences was a gift to music fans. Aretha Franklin performing in a soul food restaurant, Ray Charles in a music shop, James Brown in a church. These weren't just cameos. They were full musical numbers that showcased why these artists were legends. The action sequences were massive. The film had car chases through Chicago that destroyed dozens of police cars. It had a shopping mall rampage. It had neo-Nazis falling off a bridge. The production was enormous, one of the most expensive comedies ever made at the time. The production was massive and chaotic, and during filming, John's drug problem became impossible to ignore. Director John Landis discovered a large pile of cocaine in John's trailer. It was, as Landis later described, like something out of Scarface, a mountain of drugs. Landis confronted John about it. John tearfully admitted his addiction. The production even hired someone named Smokey Wendell specifically to prevent John from accessing more drugs. Despite the chaos, The Blues Brothers was released on June 20th, 1980, and became a hit. The film made over $115 million at the box office and has since become a cult classic. The Blues Brothers band toured to promote the film and recorded another live album, Made in America, at the Universal Amphitheater. But behind the success, John was struggling. The drugs that had been recreational were now something else, something darker, something he couldn't control. The spiral. After the Blues Brothers, John tried to prove he could do more than physical comedy. In 1981, he starred in Continental Divide, a romantic comedy directed by Michael Apted. He played Ernie Suchak, a Chicago newspaper columnist who falls for a scientist studying birds of prey in the Rocky Mountains. The character was loosely based on Chicago columnist Mike Royko, a longtime family friend. The film showed John could be tender and charming. Roger Ebert praised his performance, but audiences weren't interested in seeing John Belushi in a gentle romantic comedy. They wanted Bluto. The film was a box office disappointment. John managed to quit drugs during the filming of Continental Divide. For a brief moment, it seemed like he might turn things around. But during the production of his next film, Neighbors, he relapsed severely. Neighbors, released in 1981, reunited John with Dan Aykroyd. But the roles were reversed. John played a subdued straight man, while Dan played the loud, obnoxious neighbor. Again, audiences were disappointed. They didn't want to see John Belushi play normal. The film was both a critical and commercial failure. John was frustrated. He had tried to show his range, and audiences rejected it. The pressure was enormous. Saturday Night Live had made him famous, but it also trapped him. People wanted the samurai. They wanted Bluto. They didn't want John Belushi the actor. They wanted John Belushi the wild man. And the drugs made everything worse. Cocaine was everywhere in Hollywood in the late 1970s and early 1980s. People would literally hand John drugs on the street. His friend Penny Marshall later said, "I swear you'd walk down the street with him and people would hand him drugs, and then he'd do all of them." John knew what was happening to him. In 1978, Saturday Night Live aired a sketch called Don't Look Back in Anger. In it, John played an old man visiting a graveyard where all his fellow cast members were buried. He looked down at their tombstones and said,
"They all thought I'd be the first to go. I was one of those live fast, die young, leave a good-looking corpse types, you know?"
It was meant to be funny. It was prophetic.
What do you want to be doing 10 years from now, John Belushi?
Fiddler on the Roof.
Okay.
The final days. On February 28, 1982, John Belushi checked into Bungalow 3 at the Chateau Marmont, a luxury hotel overlooking the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles. He was supposed to be working on a script. He was meeting with executives and writers. But the meetings weren't going well. Those who saw him during that week said he was distracted, missing appointments, living in squalor. It was obvious he was using drugs again. On March 2nd, John showed up at the home of SNL writer Nelson Lyon with a woman named Kathy Smith. Smith was a Canadian drug dealer and backup singer who had met John on the set of Saturday Night Live. According to Lyon's later grand jury testimony, Smith injected both men with cocaine 5 times that day. On March 4th, John, Smith, and Lyon spent the evening together, drinking heavily and using more cocaine. They went to various nightclubs on the Sunset Strip. They ended up at On the Rocks, an exclusive celebrity club above the Roxy Theater. Some accounts say John never made it inside, staying in his hotel room while friends tried to coax him out. In the early morning hours of March 5th, John was back in his bungalow. Around 3 a.m., comedian Robin Williams stopped by. He later said he was disturbed by the state of John and the trashed bungalow, and he left quickly. Actor Robert De Niro also visited separately that night. Both men reportedly used some cocaine while they were there, then left. After everyone else had gone, only John and Kathy Smith remained. Smith later said she injected John with a mixture of heroin and cocaine multiple times throughout the night. This combination is known as a speedball. John, who had always been terrified of needles, seemed to like the high it gave him. Around 9:30 a.m., Smith was alarmed by the sound of John's breathing. She woke him up and asked if he was okay. John's last words were, "Just don't leave me alone." Kathy Smith left anyway. She said she had errands to run. She left John alone in the bungalow around 10 a.m. The discovery. At approximately noon on March 5th, 1982, John's personal trainer and bodyguard, Bill Wallace, arrived at the bungalow. He had brought a typewriter and cassette recorder that John had requested. Wallace had a key to the bungalow. He let himself in. He found John Belushi unresponsive in bed. Wallace attempted CPR, but it was too late. When paramedics arrived minutes later, they pronounced John dead at the scene. He was 33 years old. The official cause of death was acute cocaine and heroin intoxication. The autopsy revealed fresh puncture wounds on John's body. His liver and spleen were congested. His brain was swollen. The level of cocaine in his system was 0.407 milligrams, an extremely dangerous and deadly dose even for a healthy person. Kathy Smith returned to the Chateau Marmont a couple of hours later. She was briefly detained by police, questioned, and released. Initially, she was arrested only for possession of narcotics, not in connection with John's death. The aftermath and the trial. The news of John Belushi's death shocked the world. On March 6, 1982, the Chicago Tribune ran the story. His friends and fellow cast members were devastated. That year, John had been scheduled to present the Best Visual Effects Oscar with Dan Aykroyd. Dan went up alone and said, "My partner would have loved presenting this award with me. He was something of a visual effect himself." For months, the circumstances of John's death remained murky. Then, in May 1982, the National Enquirer published an interview with Kathy Smith titled, "I Killed John Belushi." In it, she admitted she had been with John the night he died, and that she had injected him with drugs. After the Enquirer article, Smith fled to Canada. She was eventually extradited and charged with second-degree murder and 13 counts of administering dangerous drugs. The case dragged on for 4 years while her lawyers negotiated. On June 11, 1986, Kathy Smith pleaded no contest to involuntary manslaughter and 3 counts of furnishing and administering controlled substances. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but served only 15 months at the California Institution for Women in Chino. Many people felt the sentence was too lenient. John's friends and family believed Smith should have faced more serious consequences, but others pointed out that John Belushi was a grown man who made his own choices. He had been using drugs heavily for years. Kathy Smith supplied them and injected them, but John asked for them. The truth is probably somewhere in between. John was an addict who needed help he never received, and Kathy Smith was willing to provide the drugs that killed him.
But was there ever any time when you really felt that you were a little bit in danger?
Occasion, and where we were filming Laura.
The burial and legacy. John's funeral was conducted by an Albanian Orthodox priest. He was buried at Abels Hill Cemetery in Chilmark, Massachusetts, on Martha's Vineyard. His tombstone featured a skull and crossbones with the inscription, "I may be gone, but rock and roll lives on." But the grave became a problem. Fans constantly visited, leaving flowers, beer bottles, and litter. The area around his grave became a mess. At Judith's request, funeral workers quietly moved John's body to an unmarked location elsewhere in the cemetery. The tombstone remains, but John isn't there anymore. In Rolling Stone's February 2015 ranking of all 141 Saturday Night Live cast members, John Belushi was ranked number 1. The magazine wrote, "Belushi was the live in Saturday Night Live, the one who made the show happen on the edge. Nobody embodied the highs and lows of Saturday Night Live like Belushi." On April 1st, 2004, John posthumously received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His brother Jim and his partner Dan Aykroyd attended the ceremony, along with Judith and Chevy Chase. John's influence on comedy is immeasurable. Every physical comedian who came after him owes him a debt. Every SNL cast member who threw themselves completely into a character learned from watching John. Chris Farley, in particular, modeled much of his comedy on John's style. Like John, Farley also struggled with drugs. Like John, Farley died of an overdose at 33. The parallels are haunting. What really happened? So what really happened to John Belushi? The simple answer is that he died of a drug overdose. But that's not the whole story. John Belushi was an artist who burned too bright and too fast. He had incredible talent, boundless energy, and a drive to perform that consumed him. He was the kid from Chicago who made it all the way to the top of Saturday Night Live and Hollywood. But fame came with a price. The drugs were everywhere. The pressure was constant. Everyone wanted a piece of him. And John didn't know how to say no. Not to the drugs, not to the people offering them, not to the next performance, the next character, the next movie. His friends saw what was happening. Dan Aykroyd saw it. Director John Landis saw it and confronted him. But John couldn't stop. Or wouldn't stop. Maybe by then, he didn't know the difference. On that night in March 1982, John Belushi didn't intend to die. He was just trying to feel good, to get through another night, to chase whatever it was the drugs gave him. But the mixture of cocaine and heroin that Kathy Smith injected into his veins was too much. His heart couldn't take it. His body gave out. John Belushi didn't plan to be a cautionary tale. He just wanted to make people laugh. And he did that better than almost anyone. The Samurai, Bluto, Jake Blues, these characters are immortal. They'll make people laugh for generations. But John himself is gone. He's been gone for over 40 years now. And the lesson from his death is the same one we've learned over and over. Talent doesn't protect you from addiction. Fame doesn't protect you. Money doesn't protect you. The only thing that can help is getting real help. And John never got that. What really happened to John Belushi is the same thing that has happened to too many brilliant artists. He had everything. And then, suddenly, he had nothing at all. Just a hotel bungalow on the Sunset Strip and a body that finally gave out. He was 33 years old. He left behind a wife who loved him, a brother who idolized him, friends who cherished him, and millions of fans who still miss him. He left behind performances that continue to inspire. And he left behind a warning about the cost of fame and the danger of addiction. If you enjoyed learning about John Belushi's life and the circumstances of his tragic death, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about the people who shaped entertainment history. Thanks for watching.